Hello again. Welcome back. Let's get straight into it. Today we're going to talk about how you're not actually behind, why you feel behind, and what's actually happening so you understand what is actually happening as would make sense. So, to start with, let's actually figure out why you feel like you're feeling behind. No, wait, 1 second, sorry. Actually, 1 second. Let me re-look at my notes before we actually dive into it. So, actually, just to run both of us through what we're talking about. So, yes, we're going to be talking about how if you're someone who feels behind, you're not actually behind. You were never behind. And we're going to look into the flow of the creative life, just so we can actually have an overview of what's happening so that when things feel the way that they do, we can understand where we are in the process and kind of like rationalize, conceptualize our life. So this is the introduction. We're going to dive into the Fibonacci sequence as a guide to the creative life for the artist life. And then the other big topic we're going to cover is making the effort to get out of the way, which is kind of how you follow that flow. So let's try to figure out why we're going to talk about the Fibonacci sequence, which is like a mathematical formula from the ancient times. And see how we can apply it to the creative life. So let's use... I feel like I'm so excited about this that I'm actually kind of scared. Let's actually run through the subtopics of this part. So we're going to use the Fibonacci sequence as a guide for the creative life. Use it as a metaphor for the creative life. Then understand the frustrations of early beginnings and why it feels like nothing's moving forward for so long at the beginning. And talk about the importance of flow and therefore why you aren't actually behind, why it's actually all part of the process. And then let's talk about the subtopics of the other part when we get to it. So let's start with the famous Fibonacci sequence. So you've probably seen this before in like math class or whatever. They discovered the Fibonacci sequence, which actually, let's look into what the definition of the Fibonacci sequence, what does it mean mathematically? In mathematics, the Fibonacci sequence is a sequence in which each element is the sum of the two elements that precede it. And it's basically the perfect spiral. A lot of elements in nature follow this spiral, but this is also kind of blown out of proportion. It's more of a mathematical concept, an architecture concept, and less of like everything in life is a Fibonacci sequence. That being said, it is a fractal, so if you zoom in super close, it's going to look exactly the same, and if you zoom out super far, it's going to look the exact same. So it's a fractal, it's a shape that repeats itself. Fibonacci sequence is that. It's like the initial fractal, how we discovered fractals, is the Fibonacci sequence. Every tiny piece is the sum of the two previous pieces. As you can see, the first initial box is like, let's say 1 over here. The next one is also 1 because it's the sum of the previous ones. The one after is 2. The one after is like 2 plus 1. And then 3 is the next one, etc., etc., etc. So it basically duplicates itself and becomes a spiral. It's the spiral. This is the like mathematical spiral. Now that we have talked about the Fibonacci sequence, I don't even know if today is a good day to do this video. I hope this is recording. Whatever. Okay, so now that we looked at it in 3D, whoa, 1 second. Now that we've looked at it in 2D, let's consider what happens when you draw it out in space. Essentially, if you can see the beginning point is here, and then it grows out into this stretched out thing. From another perspective, it gives this. So, the reason why we're going to be talking about the Fibonacci sequence today is because of the way that the structure of the Fibonacci sequence in 3D space reflects the reality of a creative life, of any life technically, but if we're being specific, the creative life. When I say the creative life, I mean anyone who's trying to live a proactive life. So if a reactive life is you follow whatever is given to you, someone says do this, you do it, someone's like you follow the steps, there's nothing new or creative or proactive in your everyday life in the sense of you make choices that are not as consequential because it's like the choice of your wardrobe on your way to work. At work, you do whatever you have to do. You're kind of like following just the steps of life. Everything is pre-written for you, and you don't really have to worry about whether or not you're going fast enough, not fast enough. If you're trying to live a reactive life, you're probably doing just fine. You're probably, not feeling behind because you're already just reacting to your environment. If nothing crazy happened in your environment, you're stable. When it does get a bit hectic, maybe you're a bit stressed out, but like there's no one who feels behind a lot of the time is leading a creative life. No, whoa, 1 second. Okay, but my point is, should I restart this whole video? My point is, if you're trying to lead the opposite of a reactive life, which is a proactive life, whether it is that you're trying to go faster in your career, or you're trying to be an entrepreneur and so there's no clear path for you and you're kind of like making it up as you go. If you're an artist, if you're I don't know, like if you feel like you identify with the idea of a proactive life and therefore a creative life, because to be productive you kind of have to be creative in terms of what you're going to be doing, where you're going to be heading. You're kind of like the creative director, the CEO of your life, and the direction in terms of all of that. So you're thinking about the vision, the mission, all these things. You're likely trying to live a creative life, which does not necessarily mean an artist life, but I think it's very close. But so, when we're talking about a creative life, the reason why a lot of people trying to live this life feel behind a lot of the time is because the beginning of the spiral, when you place it in 3D space, feels like tiny, tiny, tiny circles around the same places. So you're revisiting the same topics around your, let's say, the core start of your mission. You're also moving a lot, but it doesn't look like it externally because, again, like the movement is there. There's a lot of road covered. But until somewhere around here, it's not even very easily perceptible to the external perspective. So what happens is the initial steps of a creative life feel like this, feel like going in circles, invisible to the outside view. So no one fully knows what you're doing. No one fully respects or thinks of you as an artist, an entrepreneur, whatever, all these things that you're trying to be. But you're doing the work and going through the motions of a life of that person, of the person you want to be. But this is where the frustration comes from, because while you're doing all this seemingly slow movement, you're actually covering ground. And that leads us to the frustration behind that. So the reason why a lot of people, creative lovers, feel frustration in the early beginnings of their creative life is that externally it feels like nothing's moving, nothing's happening. And as we've seen over here, obviously that's not the case. You're moving, right? It's just externally, if you look at it from anyone else's perspective, it's not as clear as like this part of your life right here, right? And I think understanding that is a very big step in terms of maybe not feeling as behind, because you know that this is the first step that everyone has to go through. Also, you know that you have to do the invisible laps to be able to get to the bigger picture. You can't just magically, not even like people we think, like the people that we think made it in in a super quick time or whatever, have actually been doing these pointless laps. Maybe they started when they were 5 or whatever. You don't know what that internal, let's say personal, one-on-one working looks like for different people. But you don't know if the person that blew up as a musician at age 20 went to music school since they were 3. You don't know if their parents made them forced them to play the piano from the day that they could walk. You don't know these things. But the point is that in terms of craft, but also creative living, this applies obviously to skills. you need the 10,000 hours to become an expert, and those 10,000 hours are those invisible hours that feel like static, I guess, or like stable, like you're not getting the recognition, you're going through the motions, you're doing all the same things, like nothing's moving, and it's very, very it's not a good day, yeah, in terms of Lord, very frustrating. And I lost my point entirely, but the point is that this is something that you have to live through. You can't magically end up on this like outer line of the spiral where you're doing everything that you want to be doing and you're achieving all these things that you're trying to achieve, because to get there, the path is very much cyclical in a spiral sense. And that is why I think the Fibonacci sequence is a very good metaphor, because to understand that it's not a line, it's not even a messy line, it's not like a map, it's none of those things, it's actually a cyclical pattern-based path, helps you understand what you're going through and therefore make peace and adjust and I don't know, maybe like be more productive in terms of getting to where you're going. The other, I think, very interesting thing is that even when you get to a place where you've accomplished a lot of things, like you're visibly living the life that you're trying to build for yourself, all these things, you're still going to be doing the same loops around your core essence. And what that means is that when you look at any artist's work or like any entrepreneur's work, anyone's mission, right? There are probably exceptions to this, because obviously there are people who maybe don't have like a clear mission that like jumps out right from the start, or like maybe it's more implicit, maybe they know their sort of like center behind every project, but maybe we as the audience don't, etc., etc., etc. And it comes down to, you know, like exceptions, let's say, because the average artist, entrepreneur, etc., person who lives with a mission behind the work that they do will have very similar, and I'm not saying the same projects redone over and over again, but they will have a very cohesive portfolio of work because of the nature, the cyclical nature of a creative life. Which means that the same patterns, the same experiences, the same thoughts, the same themes that you're revisiting today as you live those like hidden underlayers are going to be the base of whatever you're going to be working through later in life when you're an established person in whatever profession you're trying to become an established person in. And what that means is that you're already unpacking, tackling, and exploring the themes that are going to be interesting to you in 20 years, which is a bit of a scary thought, because you feel like you would evolve in a way that, like, you know, like you're with this person today, but tomorrow you're going to be a whole new person. And the truth is that's not what happens. Like, the creative life is the process of becoming a fuller, bigger version of your initial self. And I'm not saying that like your initial self is who you are right now, because you know, like you the point is, if right now you don't feel very happy with the self that you feel like you have, it's more likely related to the fact that you've stopped somewhere down the spiral than the fact that you don't, then to the fact that would mean that you don't like the spiral altogether. Because again, the core of the spiral is like your essence as a human being, your essence behind all the things that are fun to you, that are interesting to you, and all these things. Like, this is something that's available to you, and we'll get to this in the second part of of my little essay. But everything that you need to do to live this life, to become the fuller, bigger version of you, is actually to like let yourself be more intuitive, let yourself do what you actually are naturally pulled towards, and get out of the way and let yourself live the life that you want. And I guess this is where the two parts kind of link, because the most important element of a creative life is the flow of it. Is that if today you have, like, somewhere down the like initial loop, let's say, you have maybe projects or themes that you know, you're more interested in, less interested in, etc., just know that you will have those like better and worse seasons even in your best life. And the nature, the cyclical flow-like nature of a creative life I think is so important to what we're living. And I think I should have started with this, but the reason why I've been thinking about the like flow and the bigger picture of a life in general is because I felt like I had this moment of a realization around like the way that weeks are structured. And it's a bit of a shower thought, but someone clearly defined, and by someone I mean companies that did a lot of research, whatever, they clearly defined that the most productive version of a work week is a week that has 2 weekend days, because 3 maybe gives people too much time to like relax and like not be as employable, but 2 is the perfect amount, etc., etc., etc. They set up the structure of the days and the weeks. I know this is also cultural, but like if companies wanted to change culture, they would have. And the fact of the matter is that the way that our weeks are structured are clearly thought through and not accidental in terms of like the capitalism and like productive nature of the way that companies organize their work weeks. Beyond that, we don't have a manual. No one was like, we studied like the human psychology behind a week, and this is how you should live your week. You should start slow on Monday and finish off slow on Friday, and the like most intensive weekday should be Wednesday. No one gave us those details. No one gave us like the tutorial of like that we did a study, whatever. They did the studies. They definitely know, but we weren't, as the general public, explained, let's say, the most effective or like the most peaceful or whatever. Like there's no like tutorial, which is ultimately a good thing. I'm not saying that we would have been better off with it, but the point is that we just don't have it. Like our days are structured in a certain way. We're living definitely some kind of cyclical life that's designed, but we don't know anything about the design. And then when you zoom out in terms of like a creative life, the same thing can be said about like an entire life, you know? We don't know what the process is. We don't know, you know, like, oh, you're going to have a bit of turbulence here. You're going to have a really productive week here. These years are going to be the most like active or whatever. And I know, again, this is personalized to you, and it should be personalized to you. And therefore, this is also why we don't have that like clear-cut tutorial. That's also not what I'm talking about. But I think the fact that we don't have an idea of how to think about our life is challenging, because then when you think about people who are ahead of you, you imagine yourself to be behind. And the truth is, if you start actually thinking about what a life represents, what a creative life, even a project lifetime, creative process, like if we go back to that original diagram from last time, I don't know if it was this one or, I think it was this one, yeah. When you imagine this, right, like you feel like you're stuck. If you imagine the creative process of a project or of like a creative person, if you imagine this to be this, then when you see people who are ahead of you in any way, you think that your mess is just bigger and that you're stuck in that mess and that makes you behind, that you could have been at point B. And I think the difference when you scratch this like linear perspective altogether is that the cyclical nature of the like Fibonacci sequence in 3D space allows you to realize that you're never going to be someone else. You're never going to go from point A to point B. You're never going to become the person that you want to be, because unless that person is you, an evolved version of you and a more you version of you, unless it's the expansion of you today, it just doesn't happen like that. You can't be born person A and magically become someone else. And I'm not saying that you can't change your life. You can't, like, I think this is the whole thing. It's like, this is the liberation of that. Like you have all the control, because what matters is like you inside of your heart, which is the center and the core of the spiral. And the spiral is you expanding on that core essence of you. I think when you have a non-creative or like non-proactive, when you have a reactive life that you're living, what you're doing is you're just actually stopping the natural flow of the spiral. You just choose to not continue the expansion of self. You choose to diminish, let's say, that like essence of you and be reactive, which is where you're not stuck and you're not behind, but you also can't magically be someone else, in the sense that you have to, in a linear way and in a cyclical way and in a way that's forever going to be cyclical, forever going to be moving, You have to let the flow take you and just allow your inner self to take up more and more space and to expand. And I think to me that is the overall zoomed out process of a creative life. This is not leaving me very much time for the second part, but I also think we've built on a lot of concepts here that we can kind of like link back together in the second part. The main challenge, I guess, of getting to that place where you're living the life that you want to be doing, again, just remember that it's forever going to feel similar to how your life feels right now, which is where the goal is to start expanding yourself in today's reality rather than altogether soothe yourself and soothe your desire to be more you with like escapism, whatever. This is kind of a tangent. Anyways, but the point is that all it takes for you to live the life that you want to be living is making the effort to get out of the way. And it's like kind of a paradox to say it that way, because making the effort to get out of the way actually means don't make any effort. You don't have to be more disciplined. You don't have to do more. You don't have to be better. You just have to let go. And this perceived need for effort is actually really, really misleading, because because kind of like what the spiral represents is this. Like, if at first yourself only takes up the space of like your room on a one Friday where you kind of allow yourself to like doodle a bit, over time you can allow more and more space to be taken up by yourself, and not by you, like by your soul self, whatever. And the taking up of that space is going to be the taking up of your life. So like you will be taking up your life. Your life will be more like what you want it to be. The perceived effort is because usually where the line is linear, so let's say a reactive life, you were given tasks, you have to work harder so that people can see how well you work. And the creative life is not like that. The creative life is like this, actually. You have an inner pull or push, or however you want to visualize it. You're a sail that's pushed by the wind of your like intuition, your creative intuition, whatever. You already naturally know what the next step is of the spiral. You already naturally know where you're being pulled in terms of living the life that you want. The only thing that you can do to stop this is to just like put down the sails. And this is what happens when you live a reactive life. You put down the sails, you kind of like numb out the pull, push, whatever of your intuition that's trying to make you expand and take up more space and whatever. And you say, no, actually, someone else's priorities, someone else's template, someone else's like job description that they need from me is more important. That's the only thing that will stop you from leaving. I can't decide between words sometimes, and then I choose an in-between, and it's not the word. It's not a word. Anyways, leading. The only thing that you can do to stop yourself from leading the life that you want for yourself, the creative life, like being everything that you want to be, your wildest dreams, the only thing you can do to stop them is to actually like numb yourself out. As long as you don't do that, you're there somewhere in the spiral. You're already doing the work. Even when you're not actually working, you're already doing the work. And I think this is the really important point, because periods of rest are also periods where you're going to get an epiphany, you're going to get an idea, something's going to happen. You need every part of the spiral is needed for you to keep going. So I'm not saying, yes, let yourself not do anything when you know that you can be doing something, but my point is kind of just that there's no effort that's needed for you to be living the life that you want. The importance of loyalty to the present moment is also a really important point that I want to touch on, because you can't possibly sail if you're numbed out. And like this is kind of like the protective, like when you want to hide away from risk and from actually like like going through like the spirals of like wins and losses and whatever, you want to like at that point you start wanting to just live a normal reactive life where you're numbed out. And what I mean by this, like you're asleep, you're hidden, you can be living. If you're living a life that's not yours, nothing will touch you. Nothing is gonna be that personal, that deep. Like, you're gonna be fine. Like, whatever. Like, like a tiny failure, but it's not my life, so it doesn't actually hit as deep. But the truth is, actually, you need to. This is a perfect metaphor for like what you need to be doing in two ways. Number one is that you're literally a tea bag and your life is the water. So you need to just sit still, and you can move a bit, you know. But my point is, you need to like be loyal to the present moment and allow your soul to to infuse the water around you so that your life can be the life that you want. Again, emotionally, this is a much harder thing to do because the moment that your life becomes what you want it to be, the failures hit harder, everything is so intense because it's so personal. It's like your one chance. It's not, by the way. But the point is, it's the spirals are emotionally intensive spirals. Just like a boat is much more safer staying somewhere, not moving, not at sea. You're also safer. Well, you'll feel safer sitting down, living your reactive life and not doing anything. But you were born to sail. You know, you like want this artist life. You want to let your intuition guide you. Like, you know. But being loyal to the present moment and the metaphor of the cup is also important in terms of like actually being conscious and like taking the time to like, you just at some point like take the time to watch like a tea bag infuse the water and like feel the present moment, because you cannot make art, you cannot create in any way if you're not here. Everything happens in the moment in terms of living a creative life. So you need to learn to be here. And this is probably the hardest thing. And again, it's not something that takes effort. You can't like train yourself into being here. It's really like the opposite of effort. It's just like you have to like go and like let everything else fall apart and let the moment actually like grow in intensity. I've been trying to meditate. It's not been that consistent, but this is like a really tough thing to do, and tougher because it's not something that is solved by effort. And yeah, it leads us to the last point of like letting things happen is the only way that you can do what you can is the only thing that you can do is the only thing that you can. I don't even know if I'm reading it right. The only thing you can do is let it happen. Like, you can let it happen and you can be as present as you can be so that it absorbs to the highest extent. Because that's kind of like what all of this sums up to, is that you just need to let yourself take up as much space. Everything else will follow. And the most important thing is that to let yourself take up space, you actually have to be able to sit with yourself and feel whatever it is that you have inside your heart, because that is your wind. So yeah, I hope this little messy, I don't even know how I planned an essay, and it was worse than last time, I feel like. But I hope it summed up to something and it was somewhat comprehensible. I can't tell right now if I'm more or less confused about what I said based on what I said. The ideas were here. The delivery, I'm not so sure, but you let me know. And honestly, because I know that the thing I wanted to communicate was really important, if this falls flat, like if this is incomprehensible, I'll redo this, because I think what I'm trying to say is something that right now has been really, really helpful to me. Of like, in a way, you have to disappear into the present moment. And when we think about like disappearing, of like, oh, if I'm not doing something, like we get into the anxiety of the opposite of what we should be scared of. Because we get anxious about like, oh, if I don't leave a mark, if I don't make art and like get remembered by something, I'll disappear. And so we start doing and moving and like all these things, you know, not being present and therefore not expanding, like not living fully, because we're so anxious about like the present and the future and like all these things of like, no, like I need to be working right now so that, you know, like I'm behind and all these things. Like you get stuck. Like the concept of feeling behind is actually the same anxiety as being forgotten, invisible, not leaving something behind you, etc. It's actually the opposite, because what you need to do is disappear into the present moment. And it's only from that place that you can actually start living your creative life to the fullest. you need to let go and be one with like your environment. Like this is what should happen to you. It shouldn't be a scary thing. Like the goal is to disappear, because that's the only way that you can actually be fully born, you know, in the sense of like be fully conscious of who you are and be fully aware of you living. And to me, that is, I think, what we weren't told about a creative life. So yeah, you're not behind. You were never behind. And I think this is closer maybe to what you should expect of your creative life and the baby steps to get there, even though you're already doing them, so that maybe you can feel a bit less anxious and a bit more present in the life that you're already halfway done building. That's very, very depressing. I just said you're halfway done with your life. I meant like you're almost there in terms of living the life that you want. I'm gonna stop this right now before I like ruin it even more. I need to let go. Can you hear behind like background noise? I feel like it's really loud. I have my windows open. Anyways, I really need to go. Bye.